II, the US government did a study of Air Force pilots and spies to try to figure out what quality or behavior would most likely increase their chance of survival when they were shot down or out in the field. Can you guess what that quality or behavior was?
Creativity.
That's right. It wasn't brains, it wasn't brawn, it was creativity. The ability to come up with novel ideas, to turn on a dime, and think quickly. What they call in the biz as divergent thinking, but what is really great creative problem solving. So think about that. Surviving war, surviving the vagaries of war. The best tool that you can have is a flexible, creative mind. Now, fast forward many years, and in a much more recent study, IBM surveyed 1,500 CEOs and found that the vast majority of them believed that the most important trait to succeed in this ever-complex, ever-changing business world was not discipline, was not rigor, was not integrity or vision. It was creativity. And yet, most professional adults don't feel particularly creative and don't know how to tap into their creative thinking ability. And in fact, in another recent study, I thought this was really interesting. 57% of professionals, when they were in college, thought that being creative would be helpful to their career. But once they got out of college and got a job, 78% of them thought that being creative would help them in their career. And over 75% wished they had more creative ability, and over 70% wished that creativity was a class that was taught in college. So, people who work for you may get that it would help them to be more creative. Or you may wish that your teams or your staff were more innovative or creative, better creative thinkers. But neither of you may be sure how to make that actually happen, what that would look like. So I have a quick question. How many of you here, honestly, would describe yourself as creative in the first three descriptive words that you use, the first three adjectives? How many would describe? Not bad. Good. How many feel that the people who work for you are as creative or innovative as you wish? Right.
You have no employees? Just you?
They're all millennials.
So if you want more innovation and creative problem solving out of your teams, I think that the first most important step you must take is to build a culture in your company that respects creativity, that embraces creativity. I'm talking about creating a yes and culture, not a no culture, or not in a more ambiguous, not a yeah but culture. A culture that embraces process as much as end results. Now, to build a yes and culture takes time and it takes commitment. But what it also takes, that most people don't talk about, is a kind of reprogramming away from certain cultural tenets that from the dominant culture that block that ability. So today I'm going to talk about what I think those cultural tenets are and how they function as barriers to innovation and barriers to creating a yes and culture, and then talk to you about some strategies for tackling those barriers and perceiving creative thinking in a different way. So, as I've just covered, creativity is a tool for survival. Okay, so we're not all trying to survive necessarily on the streets of Manhattan every day. We feel pretty safe. And it's also been proven as a great tool for success. So that's great because as a society, we're all about success. However, even though that we may like the idea of the importance of creativity, when people talk about creativity, everything's yes, I think that's a good idea. But I think as a society that we actually have little support or interest in creativity because we have little support or interest for the arts, which to me is one of the purest examples of creative thinking. a lot of times it gets lumped together as if that's the only place where creative thinking works. But it is the purest example. And in fact, I was doing some research trying to find out how much we spend in the US on the arts. And it's very difficult so far for me to find anything because it's always lumped in entertainment, which includes sports, which immediately makes it impossible for me to figure out how much is actually spent on the arts. But to give you an example about how the arts are treated differently in other countries, if we spent the same amount that Germany spends, another very business-focused country, we would have 40 full-time symphony orchestras in New York City alone. Just New York City, not the rest of the country, that's the difference. And for me, the point of this example is that I believe that this lack of support is actually an expression of what I think of as an overarching cultural anxiety or ambivalence about creativity. For example, what are some of our stereotypes about artists? What are some of our stereotypes?
They're cool.
They're broke, yes. They're maybe a little flaky artists. What else?
They wear berets and striped shirts.
They wear berets and striped shirts.
Good one,
What else?
Marty.
Sorry? What else?
They're gay.
They're gay. That's interesting. Okay, what else? What is another stereotype about artists?
He comes from the Midwest.
Okay. We're okay with that here in New York. But maybe emotional, maybe traumatic, maybe a little fragile. And do you feel like as a country that we support studying the arts in schools, eh?
Not really.
Not really. Why? Why do you think that is?
Not connected to money.
Not connected to money? It feels like a nice extra, right? A luxury. Something you do after the real stuff gets taken care of. Once the real stuff, then, if we have, then maybe something like an extracurricular after school. And these ideas that the arts are a luxury and that they're an extra, this plays out in creativity in kids. In the Torrance test of creativity, it's the longest, it was like a 30-year study, the longest study ever on creativity, found year after year, over the course of 30 years, that creative thinking starts to plummet in the 5th grade and goes down every single year after.
But why, if that's all correct?
So I'm going to talk about that.
Okay.
And I think that the reason that those kids that their creativity starts to go down every single year is because they're getting what I call the cultural memo. And they're getting the memo that other things matter more. That, in fact, creativity is a luxury. It's an extra. It's a side thing. It's playtime. Creativity is playtime. I used to be a creative director of a retail entertainment startup. Over and over, parents said to us, creativity is for children. So if you want to grow up, if you're little and you're trying to be a grown-up, why would you want to equate yourself with the thing that's connected to little kids? Either that, or it's almost like a virgin whore thing. It's either extra luxury, or it's very specialized for the especially gifted, for the genius, the artistic genius, but not everyday regular people like you and me. So these are the cultural myths about creativity that I think of as barrier number one, that keeps creative thinking on the margins of business. These myths, these stories we have about the value of creativity itself. Even though intellectually we might get it, we don't feel it here. So at 7 years old, you knew that creativity was your birthright. But by the time you're an adult, you think creativity is for artists and outsiders, certainly not connected to business, and certainly not connected to making money. And that's why most working professionals enter the job market lacking what I call creative confidence. And the idea that creativity should take place at work almost feels bewildering, because it's directly pushing against these stories we're telling ourselves about creativity. It feels like it's self-indulgent. It feels like a time waster, and we all know there's not enough time at work. and it's hard to justify for people. I've often been in the design department, and it's hard to justify, and everyone thinks that people in the design department are playing. Oh yeah, you guys have an awesome job, you're just gonna sit around and play all day. And so it's what you're supposed to do when everything else is done, if there's time, which there never is. So again, we may understand intellectually creativity is a good idea, but I don't think we feel it in our bones. And you could be telling your teams that you want them to innovate more. You want them to be better creative problem solver. But because you too got the memo, what you're doing is probably unconsciously communicating another message at the same time that goes something like this: please, can we innovate? Or please innovate, but be quick about it and still give me guaranteed results. And since guaranteed results and creativity have very little in common, your staff thinks something like, I think they want us to innovate more, but I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to do that. So what I'm going to do is what I know how to do, what I'm pretty sure will succeed, or at least not fail. Which takes us to barrier number 2, which is the fear of failure. So the real problem with creativity, the real evil of creativity, is that it's ambiguous. Creativity is hard to measure, and it's hard to see where it's going. And to make matters worse, when you encourage this ambiguous behavior, when you encourage creativity, you're basically welcoming failure. Because if you want to be more creative, you must open yourself up to experience more failure. You must open yourself up to taking creative risks and delving into the unknown. Taking creative risks and delving into the unknown is the ambiguity. And then as soon as you do those two things, you're now upending any chance of guaranteed results. And that's where the fear of failure comes in. So most humans are uncomfortable with both of those things. Embracing ambiguity and inviting failure can feel downright dangerous, especially at work. And that's why most people resist it. And while I definitely believe that the fear of failure is personal and different from person to person, I think it's also important to acknowledge one of its sources on a cultural level. And that springs from, I feel, from the source of our cultural identity, which is what? We're number one. America, we're number one. We're it. Numero uno. We're a culture obsessed with success and winning. So there's nothing wrong with success and winning. I'm the daughter of a football coach. I'm it.
Ooh.
Believe me, 50 years, football coach. But it's very difficult to innovate, and it's very difficult to be creative if you don't allow yourself to fail. To complicate things even further, there's another hidden element, and what I think of as a common confusion that makes this uneasy relationship between creativity and failure even trickier. And that's what I think of as our cultural infatuation with natural talent. So I was listening to a news story a couple of years ago about 2 different researchers who were studying Western versus Eastern child rearing and education techniques. So the first study was the first researcher was studying the differences in how we praise our children. So here in the West, here in the US, when your kid does great at school, honey, you're so smart. You got an A, you're so smart. I mean, I tell my cat she's smart. You're so smart. But in the East, a parent is much more likely to tell their kid, wow, you did really well, I'm so proud of you. You worked so hard. The second researcher was studying first graders in Japan and the US. And he gave each set of, over and over, each set of kids an unsolvable math problem. So over and over, the US kids literally would take 30 seconds, look at the math problem, and set it aside and say, we haven't gotten that yet. We haven't covered it. The Japanese 6-year-olds would work on the problem for an hour and only stop, they're 6, an hour, only stop when the researcher intervened to tell them they actually couldn't solve that problem. Now, I'm not saying we should all behave like the Japanese and they have their own cultural struggles, but what is interesting to me, especially with these 6-year-olds, is both groups of kids got their cultural memo by age 6. Both groups of kids. This is how powerful to me the cultural messages are. And in the US, our language of praise and the speed that those kids gave up reveals our focus on natural talent versus hard work. Innate ability, you're so smart. You can't do much about that. You're either smart or you're not. Innate ability is what gets admired. So we don't just love success, we love effortless success. Effortless success is the best success. We even have a word for people who exceed our idea of their natural ability. What do we call that? Overachievers. That's right. It's like they succeeded in spite of themselves. Talk about damning with faint praise. Now, to me, what's interesting about that isn't so much, is what we get from our own culture. And to me, that is that we experience struggle as a sign we should quit. If I'm struggling, it must not be natural. It is somehow natural. Someone else would have figured this out already. If I'm struggling, I should stop. I guess I'm not that good at this. I guess I'm not a natural. I'll stop. I guess I shouldn't do it. And when struggle is unacceptable, then struggle has become synonymous with failure. They now mean the same thing. When you hate to struggle, if you refuse to struggle, then you are saying, because you think you're failing when you struggle. You're experiencing struggle as failure. So this is really important because struggle is the same as process. Struggle, creative process is struggle. It requires struggle. And we must separate the words failure and struggle because if we want to innovate, if you want people to be more innovative, they have to get more comfortable with struggle. Because struggle is a process. But a challenge that I think we face is that process has never been more invisible than it is today. For thousands and thousands of years, everything a human being owned, they made themselves or they knew who did. It's only the last 150 or so years that machines have made something, made almost everything, and then in the last 50 or 60 years where technology has sped that up so much that it distorts our idea of how long anything should take. This is taking too long. This should be done by now. I should be done by now. Someone else would probably have gotten this done by now. This shouldn't take this long. Our focus on end results, only seeing end results, makes us very unfamiliar with process. It's hard to appreciate process when you almost never see it. And changing our relationship to process and struggle is key to building creative muscles. But the good news is that the creative process has a predictable rhythm. It's not magic and it's not genius. And now most academics would describe, when people talk about creativity, when I'm reading about it, I think, and people with PhDs write about it, I think you guys don't make anything. But these are what you'll see. If you Google this, these are the words you'll see. Prepare, incubate, illuminate, implement, clarify, ideate, develop, implement. And they're not bad. They're all right. That's kind of what happens to me as someone who makes things all the time. That's kind of what happens. But to me, it's almost beside the point. Because it's not that not knowing these four things, it's not what's stopping people from creating. What's stopping people is how they feel when they're doing it. So to build creative confidence, we must turn around how people feel in the midst of process. And to me, by understanding the emotional aspect of struggle or process, you can connect your own creative experience to the universal truth of creative thinking. So you no longer perceive your particular creative struggle as some sort of unique character flaw. Like someone else totally would have gotten this, I don't know what I'm doing. But instead, you realize that it's intrinsic to the process itself. And by treating struggle as normal, you create a culture that respects and expects struggle, rather than fears it and dismisses it. And happily, the creative process has a predictable emotional arc as well. as well as this intellectual art. And I believe that there's a pattern that you can get familiar with in this emotional struggle that can give you a better handle and help you keep going. So I'm going to share that with you now and we can see what you think.